welcome to Homegrown Harmony. It's just a mother and her daughter, and them telling their story.
Okay, so maybe you are on the cusp of trying to figure out if you should homeschool or not, or maybe you already are homeschooling and you're trying to figure things out. Well, today we have a really great episode that is titled A Day in Our Life, and we're going to walk you through what a day in our life has looked like since like I could remember. Of course, it's changed. I'm older now. I have different things going on, but the basics of what our day looks like have still remained the same. And the reason why you should watch this episode and why this is so important is because it may be, like I said, maybe you're trying to decide if you should homeschool. There are a lot of things we're going to talk about in this episode that are really good pros to homeschooling. Like the fact that I never had to wake up at 7 a.m. for school. I mean, I'm in seminary now, so I still have to wake up at like 6 now, but it's okay. But there are so many great pros. Or maybe you are already homeschooling and you're trying to figure out, like, when should you get your kids up? Well, we're going to give the answer that you shouldn't. You should just let them wake up naturally. So, let's dive into it.
So, because it's a day in the life, we're going to start with our morning.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing that she talked about was the fact that I didn't ever require my kids to get up.
Yep.
I let them sleep in or wake up at their own pace. Typically, they all wake up around the same time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we did share a room.
There have been times that you've slept in and the boys haven't. But I also haven't been a strict bedtime person. But we'll get to that on the tail end of the day. So one thing that I strongly believe in is waking up naturally. You have REM cycles, and if you're woken up in the middle of a REM cycle, it's going to be rough. That's why a lot of people end up hitting their snooze button like 20 times. And it's just not helpful. It's not helpful at all. So being able to give my kids that leniency to wake up when they were well rested helps with the mental health and emotionally, like... less arguments happen because everybody's just well rested and more balanced in their brain chemistry.
Which I think in our society, people really have made it sound like it's okay if you don't get enough sleep. Like, it's become a social norm. But what we need to start rediscovering is getting enough sleep and see how that will change the way that people behave. It will change our behavior, our cognitive function, like all of those great things. And you will see an improvement in your children if they get enough sleep.
Yeah, and the amount of sleep that they need. And that is, it can vary between kids, too. Some kids need 12 hours, 13, 14. Teenagers need a lot more sleep because their brains are just going on overdrive. Yeah. So being able to recognize that and letting my kids have that leniency has really helped in the way that we function. And the other thing that I really focus on is breakfast. One of the major reasons that I love homeschooling is I don't have to rush in the morning. We don't have to get through a bowl of cereal and get out the door. So we make a lot of high protein breakfasts. I do a lot of, especially when the boys are here, I'll make what we call puffy pancakes. It's known as German pancakes. And it's got a lot of egg in it. And so there's a lot of protein in that. The boys like pancakes, and so we'll do pancakes and bacon or something like that. But when we do pancakes, I try to make sure that they have some type of protein to go with it. So that they're having protein. I learned a long time ago that protein helps with regulating your blood sugar, and your blood sugar, if it goes low, is what causes you to be what's called hangry. And I have a child that gets hangry easily, and once I figured out that if I gave him protein first thing in the morning and a good amount of it, he was much less likely to have breakdowns and tantrums and all that kind of stuff. So we try to make sure that protein is a good substantial part of our breakfast.
Well, and this really applies to any meal. A couple weeks ago, I went on a hike with my sister, and we packed like PB&J sandwiches, and I had like some fruit or whatever. So I had a pretty decent sized meal, but there wasn't a lot of protein in it. And so what happened is a couple hours later, I was out playing some games with my friends, and I started to get really hungry, and some stuff went down. And usually when that type of thing would happen, I would just brush it off, and I'd be like, whatever, it's fine. But because I was so like hungry, I was just, I don't know, it was over dramatic dramatized. That's not how you say it.
Dramatized.
Dramatized. Thank you. It was just over
Dramatized.
Yeah, thank you. And then I went home and I was like, and I remember that I was hungry and I was like, well, no wonder it was such a big deal to me. I was hungry. And so I've noticed that if I don't eat enough protein or just eat enough in general, I have so much more emotional problems.
Yeah. So that is a big part of our day in our life, is making sure that we start it off well.
Especially when you're studying, because I mean, yeah, like I could deal with the emotional stuff or whatever, but when you're studying and you're having the emotional thing and you're hungry, like, it's not a good combo.
Yeah, it's not at all. So for quite a while, we did what we called breakfast and books, and that was really good. We would do breakfast while we read our scriptures and books together. We read several chapter books that way, and studied our scriptures while, especially the boys were eating, which was super helpful.
Especially since Kenny, we think he has ADHD, so it kept his hands busy and it helped him focus.
And he didn't constantly interrupt and ask questions.
Yes.
That was kind of a plus to it.
Yeah.
We haven't been so consistent with that just because of our schedule now. It worked really well when you guys were always Monday through Friday there in the morning. And
our schedule is never like that. And not all three of us are here together. Usually it's just me and the toddler. And
so it just creates a different dynamic.
Yeah.
And then after that, we instead of doing a timed schedule, from this time to this time, we're going to do schoolwork and yada yada. I've really tried to focus in on allowing my kids the freedom to play when they are creative, because that can change over the day. I can have a kid that will want to play Ninja for 3 hours straight, and the boys would play for hours. They would they'd zip themselves in suitcases and stuff. They did some crazy things, but they were allowed that time, If I had ever been okay, well now it's school time, we need to put everything away, it would stop that trend, that forward projection of that playtime.
And then when it's now it's playtime, they might not want to, and they just want to get on
tablets or something. Now they're done with that,
Yep.
So sometimes we start with free time, and let them do what they want. They are free to, but there's no electronics in this time period. You can play board games together. You can play with whatever you want. You can make an ATM out of a box.
We did do that. It was a very entertaining day. I was working on the side of the ATM and they gave me the money. Anyway, that's a story for another time. But the other thing, though, is you might be wondering, well, when did they get their score done? And that's definitely the biggest worry with that type of dynamic of let them play is Mom would always tell us, so our electronics time started at 3 o'clock, but we couldn't get on until we had passed off everything. So we had to have this and this and this done. And if we didn't, we couldn't get on. And we couldn't get on until that was done. So that was the caveat was, go ahead, play. But then you also had to make sure that you had your stuff done in time. And so that allowed us to be able to play when we wanted to play. But then we would still have to make sure, okay, let me stop for a little bit and let me go do my schoolwork. But it helped us. I think there are probably some downsides to that still. But it definitely helped us figure out our own time management without having you just give the time, okay, here's what you're going to do. It allowed us to try and figure out what worked for us. And so I started doing stuff different than my brothers did. They would be out there playing, and I'm I'm getting my schoolwork done, so when 3 o'clock comes, I can get on my tablet. And so it helped us develop and learn those things by ourselves, whereas with kids in school, they never really get to learn that on their own. I think that's another really big plus to homeschooling is that you're putting your kids in an environment where they get to grow so much more. And going back to what we said in the last episode about how homeschooling allows you to kind of grow with the child, you can put them in circumstances that grow according to what they need. Whereas, in public school, it's just fit into this mold, and not every kid is like that. And so whether it comes to schoolwork or time management, you can grow with the child, and it also helps them grow when they need to grow.
Yeah. And then, all right, so we typically start with the free time aspect, and then my boys will typically probably by like 11 a.m. be like, oh, we need to get our schoolwork done. We should, it takes them a little while before that. And the other things that they have to do are chores and like their daily hygiene stuff. They have to brush their teeth and get dressed for the day and stuff like that. So, and that's kind of lenient on how we do it. Sometimes we get schoolwork done and their chores are still not done. And by like after lunch, I'm like, hey, you got to get some chores done. And then we do that. So, but with homework or schoolwork, what I've typically done has been like more of a soft approach of what needs to get done every day. I don't want my child sitting at the table for 3 hours crying over math because I don't understand. It's not conducive to learning. It's not giving a love of learning. It's not teaching a love of learning. It makes it a hard relationship for everyone involved. There were several times where Ruth would get really upset and she didn't understand, and I was trying to explain and she wasn't understanding what I was trying to explain, and so I was just like, all right, I guess we're done with math for today. And it wasn't ever me enabling her in saying, okay, it's easy to quit, you can just quit. It was more, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to just, you're going to be banging your head against the wall. You're not going to learn. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to enjoy this experience, so we need to just stop now.
And I will say that when that happened and I wasn't understanding, we had that big, like, butting of heads when we were doing math was right when I was going through puberty. And so once I got through all of that and my head was a lot clearer, I loved math. I really enjoyed math. It's harder now that I'm older and I'm doing college level stuff, but, like, just algebra and geometry, like, just, like, the basic levels, I loved once I could understand them, and I understood them better when I got through that. And so that's another thing, that's another really good thing about homeschooling, is that you can take the time to understand the development rate of a child's brain and understand that when they're going through puberty, math is a lot harder. And the thing that we've talked about a lot, just me and my mom, is that boys tend to go through puberty at, what age is it, 13, 14?
Yeah.
And those are usually the ages, that's like, what, 7th and 8th grade, and that's usually when they start getting to harder math. And that's why, especially boys in classroom, struggle so much with math when they get so far behind, is because they're going through puberty while still being pushed at a rate that they can't understand. And so they go home, they do their homework, but they're not really understanding it, and then they get pushed on to the next thing when they don't even understand the thing that they learned yesterday. And so it just gets them further and further behind. And by the time you get to high school, like, where are you? Yeah. And so that's the wonderful thing about homeschooling, is that if you need to take a break from math for a couple of months while your child is going through that, you can do that. You have that liberty. And then once they're through that, they, like, I know once I got through all of that, I could just get math done like that. I was like, all right, let's get this going. And I just flew through math once I could understand it and I had that clarity of mind.
And it's important to realize that with puberty and math, and that all of there's a lot of things that go into, like, she kind of has a soft understanding of it. Puberty, when your brain goes through a lot of changes in puberty, you start to develop the understanding that is required for algebra and beyond that. If your brain hasn't gotten to that point, algebra is going to be really hard to figure out. And I didn't know that when I started teaching her, and so that was a struggle that we had. She was getting the concepts, but sometimes it was taking her a while. So, like, I've been a little bit more cautious with the boys and their approach with math. I've tried to, like, dial it back. I've tried not to push it so hard. And I've said, let's work on really having the foundation in your fractions and your multiplication and your decimals and everything. Make sure that you're really solid in those, because until puberty hits, algebra is going to still be sitting there waiting for us anyway. So let's get through that. Yeah. So that's really been helpful for me in understanding those developmental things when it comes to the brain and puberty with teenagers. Anyway, so that was just a side note. Okay, so we kind of went over, like, the soft approach of, like, sometimes we stop when we need to. I also have a rule of, like, okay, so we're going to get this lesson done today in math, but we're going to put a time period on it. So as long as you're actively doing homework or your math work for 30 minutes, you can stop at 30 minutes. If it's you've only done 3 problems, then okay, 3 problems was tough for you today. That's fine, as long as you were trying. But sometimes it's you get the whole thing done. And for example, Brigham was we were trying out a new program with him, and it was some content that I knew he already had gone through in one of his other program that he was doing. And so I sat him down and said, look, you're going to know some of this. So what I want to do is I want you to try and get 3 chapters done a day. And I was like, if you get 3 chapters done in 30 minutes, great. If you don't, no big deal. We're just going to see where you're at and see how far you can get through it and how fast you can get through it. And he wasn't ever getting 3 chapters. It was more like 1.5 to 2 chapters. But I wanted to make sure that we filled that 3 out because I didn't want him to do 10 minutes of math a day. I was like, no, I want to make sure that he fills that time. But he went through probably half of that book doing 1 or 2 chapters in a day. And then it started to slow down when it started to get harder. And like I could tell, okay, now we're starting to get into the content where he's needing to stop and reevaluate and learn more and stuff like that. So it's really important that you can kind of take that time to see where they're at and understand, okay, this is where they're starting to really need to dive deeper. And that's the point where you can say, okay, 30 minutes is enough today. We will move on tomorrow. Yeah. And I teach more to the approach of mastery instead of we're going to move on.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we're on a subject for a really long time. Kenny, we had to stop for a really long time when it came to multiplication. And we tried to add in division, but he wasn't grasping division, and I knew it was because he hadn't fully grasped multiplication. So I was like, all right, we're just going to have to practice multiplication a lot, over and over and over again. So being able to recognize, okay, my kid doesn't understand this. He's not going to know more the next step if he doesn't understand this. So making sure that I had that foundation in place with them as far as each subject makes it a lot easier down the line. So yeah, that's kind of the concept behind our time management with school as far as every subject is relatively 30 minutes depending on the subject.
And I will say that is something that I've done my entire life and still continue to do now that I'm in college classes. I get very overwhelmed if I do it for too long, and so what I would do is I will, like I said, I'm taking psychology, and so it's a lot of reading, and I much prefer to do videos. I'm a visual learner, and so reading can be hard for me sometimes. And so what I decide to do is I'll read for 30 minutes and then I'll move on to do something else. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking a break. What I've found to be most productive for me is to take 15 minutes and just like clean my room, which is something that I wanted to get done anyway. But how I've done it in the past and didn't quite work as well as I get like a couple hours of school and then a couple hours of cleaning or whatever. But doing it this way means that I still get all of that time done, but I get to split it up. And so it makes my schoolwork so much more manageable, the reading more manageable, and I still get things like done and things clean. I still take like designated breaks, but not nearly as many breaks as if I were to like, I don't know, get overwhelmed and then like just quit or whatever. So it helps me feel better, and so the 30-minute thing is still something that I very much use, and it's like a really big tool that I use today. And then, quick question for you: are you planning on diving into like why we don't do like hours and hours of schoolwork, or can I touch on that?
You can touch on your version of it, and I'll fill in anything.
Okay. So another thing that I think, if you are a new mom to homeschooling, is especially if you have come out of public school, is I think if you did have your child in public school and now you're going to homeschooling, you might have this idea of, well, I need to be doing hours and hours and hours of homeschooling just like you would in public school. But here's the thing that like is something that I'm so glad my mom did with me, is I only did like 2 hours a day. I still usually only do about 2 hours a day. But I will say this, I think sometimes like when people hear that I've only done 2 hours a day, they're kind of like, well, how does that can't possibly work. But as we talked about in the last episode, I am very far ahead. I'm already in college classes. I have been grades and grades ahead my entire life, even though I've only been doing 2 hours a day. And I think part of the reason with that is, well, so first off, we did do schoolwork in the summer. We don't take quite as many breaks as they do in school. So that does help a little bit. But also, it helps that we do it according to when I need it. But definitely think it really does help that I don't get overwhelmed in the day. And it's like we were saying earlier about how when you're overwhelmed and like you're just upset, you're not going to get anything done. And so because I only had a few other things I had to do and I could take breaks in between, when the time I did spend doing schoolwork, I was doing it. I wasn't just like, picking my nose and doing it and just like not really focusing. I was there, I was present, and I was doing it, which is something that we actually heard in another podcast a couple days ago about how it's not so much the time that you spend studying, but the intensity of it. And that's something that I think that's really that we practice our whole lives, and I still continue to practice today. So when you think about building your day as a homeschooler, just take in consideration that you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours at a table studying, because a lot of times just doing a couple hours could work wonders.
And it actually, so along with the whole, what you were saying about like the focus of what you're doing in those 2 hours, is the fact that at school, that focus is split up completely different. In public school, they have a lot of distractions of other kids in the classroom. They have a lot of time management things. They have a lot of extra activities going on. They have a lot of switching things around. There's a lot of just extra fluff and extra things going on. Not to mention, there's a lot of busy work. They do a lot of like just extras that aren't
Things that don't really
necessary. So when you take all of that extra out, it really comes down to, you get a good 30 minutes of math a day, and you are solid. And same with reading. They tell you 30 minutes a day of reading.
Which is all you should do, because that's all you can really handle in a day.
Your brain that's more than enough.
And that's the thing that I think so many people don't understand, is that you really can't handle a whole lot more than that, because...
You're not going to retain it.
Exactly, you're not.
So that's kind of where we go. So when they were younger, it was a little less time. It was typically 15 minutes per subject. And then as they got older, it was a little bit longer. And we typically stay around 30 minutes per subject. There was a while where they were all doing an online program, and it was really just get each subject done. And it was usually less than 30 minutes for each subject. But I tried to make sure that there was a good amount of time on the program before so I tried to adjust it to each kid and where they were at and what they were capable of doing. So that's kind of where we are at as far as fluctuating our school schedule around everything else. The other thing is, for a lot of this, I have been going to school online. I did probably about 4/5 of my BA online, and I am doing my master's completely online, and I have had to take a chunk of the day for myself, and so usually after lunch it has been my typical time where I take for myself, and then sometimes like when they get on their electronics and stuff like that is my time to study, and I did that for the entirety of going to school to get my BA. I would lock myself in my room if I needed to. I told them, look, you need to leave me alone for a while. Go do other things. If there's arguments, you need to figure it out. Yeah. Obviously, if it was a big deal, they'd come to me.
Yeah. But honestly, sometimes it is good just to leave kids alone to themselves, to let them learn how to resolve disagreements. So.
And I think, like, you guys don't argue as much as a lot of other kids, because I think you guys have figured out that you need to figure it out, and like I've tried to teach you guys how to communicate to figure it out instead of always coming to me about everything.
Yep.
So
okay, so you got divorced in 2017. When did you go back to school? How long after the divorce
So
was
I
it?
actually started a couple of classes online in 2017. I took 2 classes from an online program before I found out that I would be able to do BYU Pathways program.
Right.
So in 2018, I started doing BYU Pathways.
Okay.
That takes a year. And then I was able to switch to completely on BYU Idaho's online
But,
program.
so yeah, you went through your divorce. You had all 3 of us all day long, Monday through Friday. Dad would come pick us up after work at like 5 or 6. You were doing schoolwork, and you were teaching us. And so I think that's just something that's really important to note here, is that I guess if you're a mom who wants to consider going back to school, it's possible. Like, especially whether your kids are homeschooled or not, it is possible. Like, Mom had just went through a divorce, which is no light thing. Like, you still have to deal with all of that. She had 3 kids that she was taking care of essentially by herself during the day, teaching them and then doing school.
Yeah. And it's all about time management and being able to make sure that you have a plan in place. I knew what we needed to do for you guys. I knew what I needed to get done for me. I would usually look at my week and say, okay, I've got to do X, Y, and Z. And this is when I'm going to do X, this is when I'm going to do Y, and this is when I'm going to do Z. And I tried to, like, spread it out so that I wasn't overwhelmed. made sure I knew when my big projects were due and
Yep.
spread that all out.
Well, and I think that's really interesting that I don't think I've thought about until just this moment is that's exactly what I do. I will look ahead and I will say, this is what needs to get done, this is what I need to get done this week. And sometimes it's kind of has to be moved around and stuff. But I think that really did set a great example for us growing up is you were able to go back to school and then you did teach a lot of things to us, even if you weren't directly teaching us, but just by your example. And so that's another really cool thing about homeschooling is that when you're with your kids, you don't just teach them by out of textbooks, but you teach them by your example. Today, the toddler was taking a bath and she was saying that she was doing a workout because she sees mom working out every single morning, and so she was pretending that she was lifting weights and things like that and stretching her hip. And it was really adorable. But so you learn by example, and that's another really cool thing about homeschooling.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the philosophies I follow, is teaching by example. And, your kids are going to read if you read. Mm-hmm. Your kids are going to work out if you work out. There's all these people out there that are like, oh my gosh, this whole family plays football. This whole family plays an instrument. And why is that? Well, it's because the parents do it. Mm-hmm. And because the parent does it, the kid is most likely going to want to do it too. So there have been a lot of times that you guys have sat there and watched me work out and cheered me on and stuff and done silly mm-hmm. things like that, But also music. Yeah. I've gotten you into it and you enjoy it. Yep. And the boys have shown interest. Yep. And we are a musical family. I haven't ever shoved any of you in it and been like, you have to do this. But it's been very, if you want to do it, this is what we're going to do. I've tried to say, I want you to learn the piano because it's a good place to start. I can help you learn it. Mm-hmm. I can teach you how to read the music and all that kind of stuff. So being able to teach by example in all aspects, getting a degree for mm-hmm. myself, I was doing schoolwork. You guys saw me doing schoolwork. I read a book. You guys see me read books.
And we also saw you set boundaries with your schoolwork. You said, right now I am doing schoolwork. You have to leave me alone. And so that definitely taught us a lot about respecting each other's time, respecting our own time, and being able to set boundaries with our time. Mm-hmm.
And time management, yeah. Yep. So there's a lot of great, things about teaching by example in that aspect of our lives. So, yeah. I think the only other things would probably be surrounding, we obviously do dinner and stuff like that. But it would be the bedtime. I mm-hmm. haven't been a staunch, you have a bedtime. Obviously it's okay, it's getting late, we need to go to bed. Mm-hmm. But I've been more of the approach of you go to bed when you're tired. And I believe wholeheartedly in not telling a kid to stop a book. If you want to read that book, go for it. Just don't be a person I don't like tomorrow. So
yep, that's what she always told me. She was like, I don't care if you say it for me, but just don't be awful tomorrow.
Yeah. And then if it was an issue, then we would approach her that
Yep.
But I wanted to encourage reading, and mm-hmm. so I always stayed up late reading when I was younger as a teenager. But I also, we don't have a wake up problem mm-mm. either. We don't have to be up at 6 a.m. So that wasn't ever really an issue. There were times that you would read until 1 o'clock in the morning. And
I've gone even later than that.
Yeah, and then getting up a little bit later for it. But
yeah, but I will say having that freedom to not have to put the book away has actually helped me realize when I do need to put the book away.
Yeah,
because it's made me realize that I don't like how I feel when I stay up until 4 a.m. and then have to wake up at 2 o'clock the next day or something, anything like that. I've realized my limits, and I never would have realized that if I hadn't have had the freedom to learn that. And
that's my whole. That's been my premise on a lot of things. Is I want my kids to learn from their own experiences mm-hmm. and not from me saying you need to because I told you to.
Yeah.
I want my kids to recognize, oh, I'm getting tired, I need to go to bed.
Yep.
And Brigham is really good about doing that. He'll be like, oh, I'm ready to go to bed. Good night. Mm-hmm. He's really good about that. And then I have a kid that doesn't sleep well. And, just kids with ADHD and stuff like that have a harder time sleeping. And Kenny has always had a hard time sleeping, has always had a hard time falling asleep. And so I've tried not to push it too much with him because laying in bed bored doesn't sound fun to me. So I'm like, as long as you're...
And it's interesting because I don't remember where I read it, but I remember reading something, it was like by a doctor or something like that, about how a lot of times if you're not tired, laying in bed isn't actually going to help, but getting up and like reading or doing something that can calm your mind usually helps you fall asleep better than just laying there. Mm-hmm. Now, Kenny doesn't actually ever do anything calming. He just watches TV until he's tired, which...
Yeah, I know.
But that's a choice that he makes, and eventually one day he'll realize, oh, this doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah.
But
and it
he
might not.
that himself.
That's the thing, is he's going to learn patterns that work best for him. So
right.
And for a long time we would listen to audiobooks at that time, and I think that really actually did help him quite a bit. And there have been times where I've tried to get back into that a little bit more with him, but he's not with us very much, so I can't really control that as much with him anymore. So but yeah, so that's kind of what our day looks like. I know it seems a little convoluted, but that is because we do much more of a flexible arrangement. And there's a lot of pluses to that. So, like, when we have things going on, like Brigham has started doing karate a couple days a week. So, it's nice because it's not like, oh, it's ruined our schedule. Right. I don't have to worry about, okay, well, we've got karate at 11, and, well, that was when reading and writing was, I don't have to worry about that. It's like, okay, well, lunch will just be a little bit, will be a little bit later, school will be earlier, we can work around it, and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I just love, like, it's one of the very beautiful things of homeschooling is you get to choose what you do for your family and for your children. You get to choose your schedule, you get to choose what you teach them and how you teach them, and you don't have that flexibility and those choices when it comes to the public school. And so whether you're on the fence about homeschooling or whether you already are homeschooling, you get to choose. And so maybe if say, for example, you are on the fence, you're trying to figure it out, the greatest pro to homeschooling is that you get to choose everything. And so maybe your day won't exactly look like ours, but it could look similar, it could look totally different. You get to choose. You have that power and that control, and that's one of the most amazing things about homeschooling. It's why I've loved homeschooling, why I haven't chosen to go to public school now that I'm older, and why I plan to homeschool my kids when I'm older.
And that should be noted, is that I did give you the choice. You went and talked to the school board and asked them questions and really delved into whether that was something you wanted to do, and you ultimately realized that public school would be holding you back in several ways. So I feel like that pretty much gives you an idea of the flexibility that we have in our home and the blessings of homeschool in our lives, and can maybe give you some ideas of ways to deal with educating your kids.
So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Yep.